Welcome to our remote podcast edition of a first name basis. Today I got a really good friend with me. I've known for about 20 years. And this is our podcast where we bring on special guests, industry leaders, TribalScale employees. But we have an authentic and informal conversation about a variety of relevant topics of the day. And not always tech related, but today I'm really happy to have a really close friend of mine, someone who's mentored me for a very long time, and just an all-around solid dude, Amar Varma. So Amar, welcome to our podcast.
No, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Amar, I know the good, the bad, the ugly when it comes to you. So we're gonna take a couple layers off the onion today. But for those of you who don't know you, how would you introduce yourself? There's so much you've done in your career, man. I'd love for you to try to sum that up into a couple of sentences.
Yeah, I think just a guy is the first thing to say. Obviously, I've had a bit of a longer career than some of you all, but I did a degree at Waterloo in electrical engineering, class of '99. Moved to Silicon Valley after that. Spent a number of years in semiconductor industry, startups in the telco equipment space, software, all this kind of fun stuff, and then moved to Toronto to join a VC firm.
Just on that, what made you do like the engineering jump into VC?
Oh, it's interesting. So I was at a company called Jetstream Communications. We made voice over packet equipment for telcos. This is way back.
Yeah.
Now everything's over packet. And the idea there was we would, move the old phone system onto the new data networks. And what was great is we started with a few people. We ended up, a couple hundred people in 18 months. Had revenue of 30 million in our second year. We're on a path to going public. Had an S1 filed. And then the effects of 9/11 really took out the legs of the entire market. Forget what we were doing, but just everything. Mm-hmm. And we couldn't sustain that. And, layer by layer, we cut until, there was no company left.
Yeah. And
what really struck me at that point was these venture capitalists, when we needed money, when we didn't need the money, were throwing money at us. We had oversubscribed rounds. We had $1 billion valuation. And when we did need money, when things were getting tough, these venture capitalists were nowhere to be found.
Right.
That's
really, like your bank.
and that really was stuck with me as hey, something's really, really gone awry when the folks that you want aren't there when you need them. And I really needed to understand that psyche and thinking. So that's why I took a job at a VC firm.
All right, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, so I was there for a few years, enough to, go from being the new guy to, knowing a bit, and then, being dangerous enough to know what I didn't know. Mm-hmm. And then what really happened around then, this is kind of in the, 2006, 7, 8 timeframe, I really realized that the market was changing. Software was eating the world back then. The life cycle for companies when you were to do hardware and semiconductor and equipment, these were years and years and years as a product cycle. There were tens and tens and tens of millions in investment to get to market. Mm-hmm. And, when you started seeing these software companies pop up that were, weeks and weeks and weeks,
right.
$40 million in investment.
Yeah.
To get up and running, I really felt that was a change in the market dynamic from what I had observed, and really thought this was a genre and a new start to something.
So you came back to Toronto and you started your VC career where?
Yeah, I didn't grow up in Toronto, so it was a new thing for me. But I worked at a place called Vengrowth. At the time, they had $1 billion under management. Very focused in tech, and it was really great because I got to start the investment cycle in a down market. I got to apprentice in that space as we went through.
How'd you even get the job?
Cycle.
How'd you even get the job?
Totally random, to be honest.
Like you walked into a VC office going, "Hey, hire me."
Yeah, so I had. I remember this very specifically. I had after Jetstream was shuttered, I had 13 job interviews because it wasn't really a time that I was in a position to go start something.
Mhm.
At least that's what I thought. Maybe I was right, maybe I was wrong. But I had 13 job interviews, and I got 2 job offers. One was to work with some of the folks at Jetstream at the next company,
Cool.
and the other one was to work at this VC firm. And kind of resonating back to my previous story around folks who are there when you don't need them and not there when you need them. I thought I really need to understand why that was.
Yeah. Okay. So you're at Vengrowth.
Yeah, I
You
figured
get
I'd
the
stay there a
interview, you
couple
get
of
in there.
years. Yeah, I figured.
Entry level, where did they bring you in? What did they have you do?
Oh yeah. I was the totally new guy. There is a totem pole pecking order, and
Mhm.
some of the more talented folks try and bring you in and arms around you to help you get through the process and learn. And then there's some who are just completely insecure and always want to remind you that they're your boss or something like that.
Sure,
And
sure,
you
sure.
really at a young age like that, I was
There's
kind
the
of like,
guys who look at you and say, "Hey, you work for me," and then there's a guy who
yeah,
look at
yeah,
you and say,
yeah.
"You work with me." Right? It's a big
Yeah,
difference.
exactly. And I think that was really compelling because as you go through an apprentice like this with a bunch of different folks, you can learn all their tools and watch them in action. And then you can see which ones you like, which ones you think are despicable, and which ones you love, and kind of create your own tool belt and kind of center your what your integrity belt looks like and all this stuff. So it's really interesting.
Cool, cool. So you're at Vengrowth.
Yeah. So then at
Start learning.
Vengrowth, yeah, I started learning, did a bunch of investments. I think over, oh, geez, at the time I was there, I probably did 100 transactions across, I don't know, 30 companies or something like that. It was pretty intense.
Anyone you want to talk about publicly?
It's easy to talk about the winners.
Yeah.
Lava Life was
What's the
there.
big winner? What's the big winner?
Yeah, at the time, Lava Life was a big winner. There was
Lava Life. Yeah.
but it's easy to talk about winners. We had, Quake Semiconductor. We had a bunch of cool things. Um, Virtualization of computing started. There was a bunch of investments in there. I got to tell you, the best lessons learned and things that I think people underappreciate is the mistakes that you make, right? And I think when
Yes.
you're early on in your life, really trying to, establish yourself and learn. And even to this day, I look at it this way: you got to learn from things that have gone wrong, mistakes, because they're really going to move those foundational tectonic plates of who you are and what your
Mm-hmm.
DNA is when you come to this stuff. So I think that was really helpful, watching simple human behavior and interactions fail, because communication was always a key, and I felt people either had really good skills to communicate
Mm-hmm.
or didn't. And it was a bit of an equilibrium. If you were a great communicator, your ability to execute and do ideas was somewhere in the middle. Like it was all an equilibrium of a bunch of skills. And the second you can be a unicorn in one skill set, that's really when you become super valuable. Whether it's it's usually personal to people. It's their communication capability, it's their ability to execute, it's their
And
understanding
analytical side. It could be
markets, analytics. Like there's a bunch of different types of personas, and I think that's really key. And this is why these firms are generally partnerships, and folks with different backgrounds are there to provide that diversity. And you can't be perfect at everything. That's just not how life works.
Well, you reminded me of a story you told me just a couple of days ago, where you were the smart kid in the corner, but a total prick at the same time. You may want to share that, where you'd focus in on the 10% of why something can't work, and you might have been right or wrong.
Yeah. So this is great.
I know.
So
Sorry, I'm digressing you from it, but this is how this conversation is going to
no,
go.
this is good. My whole hope here is to share insights that have helped me, learn from events, whether they were good outcomes or not. Like I think
Right.
the learning is probably the key pieces here, right? Early in my career, I was always great at, sitting there listening and understanding, because I felt like I had a very good understanding and analytical capability. And early on in those days, like the ideas and execution of the ideas were, hundreds of people at a time, right? So it was always easy to listen to a great person communicate a great plan, and then start looking for some of the areas where there's errors or there's room. And it was, I found
Or
myself,
even the unsolved piece, like that.
the unsolved
You
piece,
gotta
right? And
figure it out. Yeah.
part of the journey is figuring out the unknowns. And I was
Yeah.
always first and quick to point out why something couldn't work, what was missing, what was wrong. And I might have been right. But what I really started to understand and realize is that, you know, everybody else probably knew those things too. If you're in a really, you know, clever key, you know, group of folks, and, you know, calling it out is fine, but really seeing the forest through the trees and understanding what somebody's trying to articulate or what teams are trying to do or what the intention of something is probably the most important thing, because that gets you out of the starting blocks into doing something.
Right.
And once you're doing something, understanding the risks, understanding where you're going and all that stuff's obviously very important. But like, you know, you can sometimes be on the, you know, the negative side, and people start looking at you with a lens of like, well, you know, that person's going to have an idea, and then this other person's going to be there to say why it won't work. And, you know, that might be valuable. It is valuable for sure, but how you articulate it, when you articulate it, there's a time and a
There's a
place.
time and a place for that, right? And even
Right.
and the person may even have a different approach on how to solve it, and maybe that is something they wanted to include you in. Hey, we got to solve for this problem.
And then, you know, just as you mature and you go through these processes, the shortcomings, you know, in like Tesla fashion, can really be viewed as not problems but features, or future opportunities, right? And I think these are just things that you know, as I've evolved, as I've understood, outcomes is become a big deal for me.
Cool. So I met you around the Venn growth time, and that's when we were young, stupid, we're having a lot of fun. But you were always very focused on your career. And so talk to us a little more. What happened at Venn growth? How did that lead to your next thing?
Yeah, you know, I think entrepreneurs generally, you know, people think they're cavalier. They're probably very calculated people. Has been my observation and my sense. Waiting for the right opportunity, waiting for the right moments, waiting for events to happen and pass, and given the circumstances you're in, cards you're dealt with, that you're dealt, that you make an activity or an action out of it. I feel like I got very frustrated there because, you know, that industry, if you join an established firm, is going to take you, you know, much like a law firm or something like that. It's going to take you a long time, right?
Decade.
And a long time is a long time. And, you know, I was there. I was hoping to initially be there 2 years. I ended up staying there 5. I probably should have stayed 4, you know, 3.5, 4.
Sure.
Because the incremental learning in that last year was really more frustrating. And the good news was the frustration really drove me to go do my next thing as an entrepreneur, which was really great. Just to segue from there, you know, this was an era when everybody had a BlackBerry at work. Not everyone. Very few people had
Very few
BlackBerries at
people.
work.
Was it still a Blueberry? It was still.
It was
I
still
think this
blue.
came out with like that black one.
You know, I got
one with
the.
the dial on the side.
I remember I went from garage door opener to, you know, proper, you know, phone size. It had a, you know, an LCD screen to color. Then had a phone. Like I just had the entire museum in this whole workplace. And really the software trends that were eating the world, and then coupled that with mobile. Like I remember getting my own personal BlackBerry when BlackBerry opened it up, and then, you know, at the time there was Palm. You know, the iPhone was on its way. Just it was a dawn of a new era when I started.
iPhone wasn't even announced then, though, right? Like.
No, this is kind of before it, and the dawn really came when I started understanding the software developer environment. You know, whether you're doing enterprise software, whether you're doing, you know, semiconductor chipsets, whether you're doing graphics card chipsets, or any of these drivers for operating systems, whatever it was back in the day, there was always a software development platform that really enabled the masses of software developers to come in, make a platform better, and move that along. And that's what I started to see. And I was like, aha, this is the dawn of the next frontier of computing. And, you know, that was the bet I took. And, you know, I just gotten promoted to partnership at the firm, and I was like, see you later.
Tough
And
move,
that's,
ballsy, scary, tough move.
you know, in hindsight, but at the time it just felt like the right thing, you know, like, and that's part of the intuition and calculated risk you start taking on these things, right? So that's when I started XtremeLabs, really around mobile software development. At the same time, I also started Extreme Venture Partners, investing in, you know, mobile ecosystem plays.
And
That
so
was,
extreme from when I remember your first pitch that you guys did. It was you and Sonny doing your first pitch, call out to investors. I just showed up for the free drinks, admittedly, but you guys, as you did that first presentation, it was really geared towards the BlackBerry ecosystem. It was, hey, we can have partnerships with BlackBerry and really start to build applications for utilities to improve the BlackBerry ecosystem.
you know what the part of the thesis was, and this is something, you know, I didn't come up with it, but, you know, I had observed that once you get large number of users on platforms, whether they're consumer or enterprise platforms, the ecosystem around them builds quickly. This was, you know, Facebook had opened up its platform, so Facebook apps were a thing. This is the time frame of that stuff, right? Beyond Poke, and we're like, okay, there's gonna be an ecosystem.
It became more than just a wall. I think that's what
Yeah.
they called it back in the day. Your wall.
You know, then mobile had its platforms. You know, Palm had a platform which I thought was pretty good. BlackBerry obviously had a large user ecosystem.
I still could write in graffiti, man. I wish if someone brought that Palm OS back.
so then, you know, those were just sample sizes. And if you go back in time and you look at, like, you know, computing platforms that had these ecosystems, they were the ones that were long lasting. And, you know, over the last decade or so, those have been amplified not by 10x, but by like thousands of x. Now everybody can start writing for platforms. So they're, you know, it was mobile, whether it was, you know, Android or iPhone, and ended up being, you know, some enterprise, whether it was, you know, Salesforce, even Slack or Facebook, or all these different platforms ended up becoming large amounts of really clever developers that really wanted to, you know, optimize these platforms. And that's why you have such killer platforms today, right? And it was the acceleration through the software development that was outside of the companies.
So you started XtremeLabs, focused on mobile software, also started venture arm. So this was, let's put some dates on this. This was 2007.
It was end of November 2007. So we really started business in earnest January 2008.
Okay, and so you get into 2008, start working with BlackBerry. I remember you guys doing some Facebook stuff. Michael Phelps, I think, was like
Michael Phelps. That's right. He just won the Olympics.
Yeah.
The Olympics were coming up. They were coming up. I remember. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So
you cleaned house in China that year.
So you structured it in a way for you to go out and keep doing some of the VC stuff that you love doing. And you saw this vast amount of opportunity and new startups coming out in mobile specifically.
Let me be crisp on that, because I think there's been a lot of questions and speculations over the years, and I've had a lot of people reach out to me go, how'd you do it? I basically had two jobs. During the day, it was the XtremeLabs thing, and then the investment thing we did at night at these events or whatever. And there were two separate companies, two separate vehicles. They're two different businesses.
Yep.
And, we just had a lens, Sonny and I, to, Sonny was my partner and still my partner in business, these things. And just, these are really compelling opportunities we had back then. And we said, hey, stuff's going to change. Let's figure this out. And I think, we happen to be right, so that was the actual structure of stuff.
Yeah, so let's talk. Steve Jobs comes on stage, announces the iPhone, and bang, this tsunami of opportunity starts opening up. Well, he announces maybe the App Store, not the iPhone, because the first iPhone didn't even have an App Store.
Yeah, look, the App Store, the App Store was announced, I want to say June of '08.
Yeah.
And that really was the dawn of a few things for us. The good news is there was now a platform for this iPhone. The tough part is there weren't many users.
Mm-hmm.
But when Steve Jobs came out with something and put his weight behind it, you knew that it was worth taking a deep look at. The other problem in the backdrop was 2008, from a financial perspective, wasn't the best year. And the back half of 2008 might have been one of the toughest financial times. It was. I had lived through the dot-com crash. I was living through this financial crisis. Obviously we're in the middle of stuff now. It made business development a much more focused, a much more high return activity than say it was, 2 years ago or the year before, right? Just everything was different. So 2009 comes, the bailouts start happening. The leaders in digital start realizing that, hey, look, the whole transition to mobile is starting.
Yeah.
The iPhone's a big deal, and they want to start moving.
Android starts coming out too.
Android came out, and it was, these were all great platforms. And really what was interesting for me was, companies that had great web properties really realized and adopted mobile and were like, hey, look, we really need mobile to be a big thing for us. And that really opened the floodgates in 2009. And at the end of 2009, heading into 2010, with the recovery sort of in hand, the business really started to move in the right direction from, how are we making payroll next week to, okay, we need to go hire 10, 20, 30, 50 people. Like, we started getting in increments, and then, as we scaled to hundreds of people, it was a much different problem to look at every week.
Cool. So you continue forward then. So let's just keep going in the chronological order. So it's 2010. You're starting to hire.
So 2009. Let me.
I always say, I came by the office all the time and hanging out with you guys, and it just felt different. It wasn't an office. It was, I love the way you put it. You were like, hey, we're kind of bringing the Valley to Toronto, and the way of working to Toronto. I think it was different from any other place that you would see in the city, and how you guys set it up. So talk about those cultural things that you guys did right. Like, we're going to talk a lot about the stuff you guys did wrong. And
yeah. So
but like, talk about some of the things you did right.
Let's go through that arc real fast. So 2009, we had a cool office. It was open environment, King and Yonge, downtown Toronto. And basically it was, you could see everybody, you could see what everybody was doing, you could hear everybody. But for whatever reason, it created this real connection where people were very focused. And, we had a few other companies in there. I think Anand with Bumtop was in there at the time. Yeah. We spun them out of U of T, gave them some desks. And really it was kind of a few companies all together. And, 2009, Farhan joined, to start leading engineering. We started that was helpful because he was able to start building an engineering team of some scale from the 10 or 20 that we had, and start scaling that thing to the hundreds that we ended up with. The environment was great. We had a very structured environment in terms of time. We'd bring in breakfast every day. We'd have a stand up to start. It was a very, very team-oriented element where everybody really felt like they were contributing, and it became very clear and obvious to those who either weren't contributing or felt like they needed to do more. And the great folks always kind of self rotate back to saying, okay, I need to do something different, or I need to do something more, or even do something less. Like, these are just the types of folks that you attract.
Different for you guys was, like, even from the name. I mean, XtremeLabs, like, even just from the name, you started having these people who wanted to go and do something different, not sit at a desk or in a cubicle type of job, right? I see the
You know, when we said our
too. It's pretty
when we
dope.
said our name was XtremeLabs, you know, people are like, "What the heck is that? Are you a gym? Are you like a protein powder?" Just all sorts of things came up. But you know, at the end of the day, people who started to hear and wanted to hear the story around extreme programming, how it worked, how we adopted it, and why it was effective for us. You know, it was a change in mindset because very few people ever get educated on extreme programming unless they do it.
Right.
And we were also learning at the same time, so it was a bit of a challenge of us preaching how to do something while also learning and perfecting how we were doing it, right? And that's always kind of one of these struggles where it's like, I kind of equate it to like the high school math teacher. They're an expert on Monday, and by Friday, if you know next week's lesson, you're up to speed, right? Like not to take anything away from teachers, but like you kind of have to always be ahead by some not marginal increment, but some big increment where they go, you know, if we're doing this today, in a month we could be doing something like that. And you have to have the context and experience to explain where this could all lead, and that's really tough.
That's hard. That's super hard.
It's really hard, and I got to tell you,
it's easier to look back. It's easier to look at the breadcrumbs you put down backwards and go, "Oh, that's where I should have moved them or changed them." But
and I gotta give credit to the early folks that joined, right? Like Boris Chan, Dave Protosowski, Rob Zuzumikowski, I'm gonna forget,
Sina.
a bunch of folks, Sina, Sina Sajudi, right? These are just people who really, Sherwin Kardik. These are the folks that really took it, embraced it, and really ran with it, and really created a culture of its own, which was it was great to see in hindsight and every day seeing it. But it was new. It was all new for us. And part of the trick is, remember back in the day, never let them see you sweat. Like, the second people start thinking that, you're having something beyond, cosmetic issues, usually people get a bit panicked. But we had those issues all the time, and the people we had were like, "Hey, how can I help? What can I do? Let me give you my thoughts. Let me tell you what I see is working, not working." And that was just the types of folks that it took to really be successful at that scale. And hats off to that group.
Awesome. All right, so Extreme starts going. You start seeing this hockey stick level of growth. Start working with clients, and start building mobile properties that are touching hundreds of millions of people.
So just on that arc, so 2010 comes around, we're like, hey, we have a real business here. We moved into the office that we thought we'd never need to move out of, grew out of that quickly. And office space
broke the HVAC in the office.
broke the HVAC. That was the bane of our existence. But 2010, we started realizing that these mobile apps were a thing. We were engineers. We needed to hire people who understood, UI, UX. We needed people to understand product execution, all that kind of stuff. And, that's when we brought on Rahul Singh, who's really, hats off to him for bringing us through the whole organizational mess that we had of a bunch of folks to helping us place people in different groups where they were really being leveraged for their strengths. Because we had a lot of people there who probably were not in the best roles possible, and really he was critical to help us go through that. And that's an evolving process in any organization. Sure. And then calling out that we need people who understand how to run projects and being a product person, and then understanding people who understand how to use these devices and stuff, right? Because it was all new. There was nobody who had mobile design experience at that time.
You couldn't hire a 3-year iOS engineer.
We had to create the whole thing, right? And Leanne Stockwell Nalpora, she was critical to that. Steve Tang, just a bunch of folks in the community that you'll recognize them by name because they're doing important, still doing very important things. And I think there was a bunch of folks that really helped drive that initiative. And we were blessed to have the right types of people to jump in and say, hey, here's how we formalize these things. So 2010, we started having a real business. Anand at Bump Top got acquired by Google partway through 2010. All of the diligence meetings and all the meetings ended up happening in our new office because Anand needed to get away from his old office. And, that's really when we started meeting the next level, the next types of companies. Google engaged us for a project with Microsoft. Just
Facebook.
that was the caliber. That was the
Facebook.
caliber of things.
Yeah.
With Facebook, if you're into sports, we did Game Time for the NBA. Just these were the types of things that started coming towards us. So, and then what happened in 2010 is industry by industry started turning to mobile. Newspapers, banks, magazines, movie companies, sports leagues. And we just started becoming the referred group that could do a lot of the work in that area, vertical by vertical. And literally we would go to conferences, and our conference schedule would be like breakfast with folks, and it would go all the way to, well past dinner, of just meeting folks one-on-one, all wanting to work with us. And it was just like, whoa. It was, we really had something special when we realized that everybody was trying to seek us out at MWC in Barcelona, or, CES in Las Vegas. I just remember we would then have to go get like meeting rooms in these places just so we could find people, because going venue to venue, we weren't able to do that anymore.
Park yourself at the Chandelier Bar at the Cosmo and have them come to you.
Right. So it was really interesting. And then 2011, we had a breakout year. Mobile just kept growing and growing and growing. Facebook became a very relevant customer of ours, and we had a bunch of strategic discussions with a bunch of potential acquirers that year. And then I remember this, Larry Page took over at Google, and that was a very interesting thing for us, because if you recall, Google had acquired, I think, 100 companies in the year leading up to Larry Page's taking back his CEO seat, and that changed the dynamic for us a lot with them. But these are all just things you can't control, right? You couldn't control Eric Schmidt stepping down and those types of things. So you move on, you persevere. And then by 2012, we really, I think, I want to say we were probably burgeoning around 150 people, or closer to 200 at that point. It was just burgeoning, right? We had a massive business, and as these businesses go, you're sometimes so small and upshot so fast that you're a great target for something. Then you get so big that nobody can really target you, and then you get back on this track where you have a really great business. And what we were able to do from day one is have a incredibly profitable business, and I think that's what really helped us propel and persevere through downs and ups. So I think it's really one of the key learnings is to focus on, dollars are usually a bridge to something, and you need that bridge not to be into the ocean, right? So it's one of these critical things. So we learned a lot of those lessons in 08, 09. So we grew, very mechanically, very profitably, all the way through to the acquisition in 2013. So 2013, we were approached by a spin out from VMware and EMC at the time called Pivotal. And that was being run by Paul Moritz. Paul Moritz, for anybody who doesn't know him, and most people probably don't, but they should, he was the right-hand man to Bill Gates in the 80s and 90s, and his off the cuff remarks to me. He's like, oh, I've worked on a couple successful things. And I'm like, okay, sure. He goes, this thing called Windows, and then this thing called Office.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and in that one statement, he didn't mention the fact that he was the CEO of VMware from, it being worth a couple $100 million to, 100 billion, right? Like he totally ignores that part in virtualization and running that. Pivotal was the next dawn for infrastructure, compute infrastructure. And the reason we were a good fit was that whole infrastructure was being changed through mobile. And obviously we understood the mobile infrastructure and working through that incredibly well, intimately well. And, Rob Mee was a good friend, or still a good friend, was acquired by that entity, a year earlier. And it's like, hey, if we're going to do mobile, I have these really great team that we work with, and it made the introduction and made it all happen for us. So it was really a great process to join Pivotal that way. It was that was probably the fall of 2013 now, if I'm thinking back correctly.
Yeah, it was October. I think it was
October 2nd, actually, now the date rings through.
Yeah, it was October 2013. All right, so then we get acquired by Pivotal.
Yeah, so just to close off the Extreme Venture Partners chapter, so
sure. Oh yeah,
on top of
we got a whole other stream happening in parallel that we never talked about.
So in parallel tracks, so Bumtop gets acquired by Google, Ripple gets acquired by Salesforce, J2Play gets acquired by Electronic Arts, Locationary gets acquired by Apple, and just kind of the list is going on and on and on. We're having unbelievable success in that fund. And, Chango ends up getting acquired later. These are all like investments we'd made 3, 4, 5 years earlier that are really coming to fruition. And so we ended up.
It was awesome for me to see that, like, that intersection at Young and King just became this tech super hub. That was just like, I think it was like a methodical chaos of just all these collisions happening with all these amazing companies and entrepreneurs all in one area.
Yeah, I think let me just finish the chapter and I'll get to that chaos piece in a sec. So then, as part of the Pivotal deal, we're like, hey, we need to focus on Pivotal. So we end up selling Extreme Venture Partners actually a month after, so November 2013. So it ended that chapter for us. Kind of this organized chaos. I think what had happened was in Toronto there really wasn't a organized group that got everybody together like-minded people to really talk through and walk through how they should be doing stuff. Like I remember Chris Yee from Yukon Studios, him and Mark Lempert, amazing entrepreneurs, have had tremendous success through an acquisition now, and they're doing it again. Walked in the office one day and they sat with us, and they brought our productivity right down. We started playing their games, and like the entire office was playing games. We were great beta customers for people. So we were able to be test beds for people, ideas and concepts, which was really exciting. And there was a bit of an organized chaos that way. And, hats off to the entrepreneurs for putting themselves out there to do all this and then taking the leap of faith to work with us on a bunch of these things. So it was really great. I have no regrets looking back on it, and I know we could have done better. We made a ton of mistakes.
Yeah, of course.
And that's part of the lessons learned.
Let's go. Don't worry. I'm going to poke the bear, and I'm going to get some of those mistakes out of you in a bit. But let's continue on this chronological timeline. So
sure.
So now you sold Extreme Venture Partners. You've been acquired by Pivotal, and let's go from there.
Yeah, the next few months after that were really tough, personally. I had my first child was born September 2012, and there were some issues, and it prolonged time, and it took me mentally. Parenthood's a change for everyone, a challenge. So I don't think my challenge was any more or less than any other parent, but it was a really tough transition for me. Especially given some of the complications that had occurred, and it lingered for a long time, and I well past a year. Mm-hmm. And so doing shifts in and out of the hospital at night and overnight, and I used to see Michelle there all the time. She was always a smile that I could count on every day. And it was really great to see her every day, by the way. So I was thank her for that. But those were just things, and kind of in October it hit something. There was some serious stuff going on. So it kind of between October, let me say November, December, January, it was really tough for me to really focus on anything work-wise. So I remember just that being a time period where I had to just take some time for myself and my family, and it was tough. But everything's fine now. What doesn't
kudos to you. I mean, as your friend, and knowing just even through Michelle, like the hard stuff you were going through, that you never showed a kink in that armor when you were in the office. You came in pretty strong and dealt with the day at hand.
Right? Yeah, I kind of look back on that and I go, I took care of business, but I'm wondering if I was wearing too much armor, you know,
Sure.
and kind of in this world of, you know, that thing that everything's changed since from 2012, 2013, in my opinion. And, you know, coming in wearing a bunch of armor doesn't seem like the right way to approach a lot of these things.
I
Now,
agree.
if that were to happen today, knowing what I know now, I probably would have approached things much differently. It may have been a different outcome on things, but like, you know, everything's fine now. Everything's cool. So you know, I take it as a learning lesson. It was a tough time, but, you know, moving forward from there, in that first 100 days after joining Pivotal, I really wasn't part of the planning team to go forward, and I kind of missed a gap to kind of take a bunch of things on. And if I have any do-overs, it would have been to when I was ready back in, you know, after the 100 days, to really reassert myself in a lot of the things that I saw, you know, wanted to have happen, things that I could see as opportunities. And like, you know, I did do those things, but I don't think my voice was, I don't want to say loud enough, because it's not being loud. It's about being comprehended and actioned on, right? And I think that was something that I maybe didn't leverage my relationships with the right folks to do that. And it was a bit passive.
So what you're saying, it's a big change. You know, you were in the driver's seat.
Sure.
You and Sonny were in the driver's seat. Now you got to be working with a lot more people who are in the driver's seat as well, right? Like you got to be.
Yeah, sure.
There's a transition there of being part of a larger organization. And
yeah, you know, kind of quick segue on acquisitions. You know, anytime you get acquired, you know, it all sounds great when you're leading into it, right? Like the plans are great. The quote unquote what you can do together is awesome, and then you get there and the hard work begins. And, you know, some people, when you join these entities, don't make it easy for you, and nor should they, but sometimes they just get off track. That, you know, they put a target on your back. They're like, why you, not me? Like, and it just becomes a bit of a,
there's a whole bunch of other factors that get it, and that politics
you
happen
know,
in every organization. But
so on the Pivotal front, you know, I feel like as it went, you know, went public and subsequently was acquired by VMware, what we brought as XtremeLabs early on was super critical in transitioning or getting the company a foothold in the enterprises. You know, I think we brought enterprise customers across, you know, the Fortune 100 that were relevant to doing compute infrastructure. And, you know, because we were on the mobile piece of it, it was an easy introduction to everybody, right? So you'll see a lot of the conversions from customers we had before the acquisition to customers of Pivotal software after the acquisition, and that was a key test bed to see whether the you know, the theory, you know, what we had in the product at that time was relevant and could really form the basis for a platform to lead these companies through their digital transformation. And, you know, you see a bunch of big successful ones, right? And I think it's really awesome to see.
yeah, I always look back at my time, you know, from other software development firms to XtremeLabs to Pivotal, and just the amount you learned. Like, you know, TribalScale wouldn't be TribalScale if I didn't have each one of those experiences to form our unique offering. So you're there now, and you know, we had a bunch of success. We had a bunch of F ups on executing to the plan, pre-acquisition to post-acquisition, and then you get a niche again because you're an entrepreneur at heart. Mind you, I think we're totally underplaying how much effing fun we had throughout this whole process. Throughout all these years, how much fun we had.
I remember being asked, like, hey, how does it feel? And you know, when family would start asking, I'm like, yeah, it's not a job, it's just what I do, right? It was my DNA, my fabric. Never felt like work, right? There was obviously a slog and tough times, lots of, you know, million miles in Air Canada, all that kind of stuff, right? But like, it was really a passion, and it felt like a passion, and everybody's, you know, hopefully caught that bug, and if they did, great, and if they didn't, hopefully they eventually got it, right? And I think that's
and it was contagious. It gave me, even myself, like I woke up in the morning and wanted to rush out of my house and go to work. Like,
yeah.
You know, you created an environment where it was just like, I'm not going here. It wasn't about the money, not that the money was good and all that, but it was about the purpose. We were actually going out there with a sense of purpose.
I remember the maybe the week after the acquisition, somebody came into my office, one of the engineering team, somebody we all know, I won't use names. They're like, man, how does it feel? And I go, what do you mean? Like, must be great. And I was like, okay, well, like kind of, I was in the middle of thought somewhere else. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, man, you really did it. And I was like, and I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, this is what we all want to do. Right. And I was like, and he started getting into it. He's like, hey, I want to start my own company. I want to exit. I want to do
Sure.
this. I go, look, he goes, well, how does it feel today? I go, look, dude, like the journey is the biggest reward you're going to get at any of these. He
Right.
goes, really? He goes, man, but like you've got like all this money now and all this. And I go, it was never about the money, dude. Like the money was meaningless for all this stuff. So then he goes, well, what's
I
changed?
like to say the money's just a way to keep score. It's like,
It's not
that's
even a
all I'm
score I
doing in the
keep
game.
though,
I
right?
look at it as like, I'm keeping score.
It's a, I never kept score. Chamath used to keep score with me all the time, right? And I was like, okay, dude, like it's like doesn't really matter. But like, he goes, what's changed? I go, you know what happened today? I had to get up in the middle of the night to change diapers because there was a big accident. He's like, he goes, that's what you're telling me? I go, that was the most exciting thing I've done in the past week. He's like, okay. He goes, okay, you're a real person. You still put
That's
pants on
real
one
life.
leg at a
That's real
time. You're not something else. You're not somebody else, right? And I was like, like that you just have to be humble and grounded in what you do and let others keep score how they want to keep score, right? Because it's not about that, it's, if you get caught up in the score, then you end up trying to fill stats versus doing
I
something.
think that's why I said it was a sense of purpose. I mean, it was a purpose. You woke up in the morning and you wanted to go to work because you fulfilled a purpose.
Dude, I think, just speaking on that, we can probably get to this, but there's a lot of friends that were made for life too, outside of just people we all worked with. So let me finish the chronology for you. So I spent about 3 years at Pivotal, had a great experience, started experiencing enterprise software on a much larger scale because we went global instantly the second we had access to every company in the world through VMware EMC.
Deal structures also changed from do this project for me to how are you going to play a strategic role in my business moving forward, right?
Yeah, I remember sitting with Bill one day. Bill was the president of the company. He's like, well, he looked at our numbers. He goes, what's your project size, deal size? He's like, I ran worldwide sales for Sun Microsystems in the 90s. Like, what you're doing is inconsequential. You got to think different. And it really helped me calibrate my lens to, doing something much larger in context and scale, which I thought was super helpful. We started getting 9-figure customers, right? And that was a big change. So stayed there for 3 years, had a really, really great time, learned a lot about myself in that time frame, learned a lot about what I like, don't like, because for the years leading up to it, I'd just been kind of doing my passion project, right? And this was a chance to really understand what I liked, didn't like. And it was a good experience. I have no regrets about it. And it was a good outcome for everybody too. So I'm that's always a bonus for people. Then in October 2016, I started a company called Autonomic, again with Sunny and some others. And it was really on the backs of the work I had been, understanding and doing at Pivotal. I was the exec sponsor for Ford Motor Company. Ford Motor Company was a big customer of Pivotal. They were going to drive their digital transformation off of Pivotal's technology, and it was really great. I got to work with the senior leaders of the company. I got to work with members of the family. I got to really understand how the business of automotives work. And at Pivotal, we did the first owner application. And if you think about a car company, Ford does, I don't know, 130 billion in revenue a year. It'll be different this year, obviously.
Yeah, a lot of companies are going to be very different this year.
They're only
I saw a thing I saw a thing yesterday, the other day, EBITDA, but with the C at the end. So you got to add the Corona.
There you go. So if you think about an auto company, and Tesla's an exception to this, they touch your life every day as your transportation vehicle. But the only way you interact with the company is through the finance department.
Mm-hmm.
Your interaction to buy the vehicle is either, you know, through a dealership or an individual that's selling you used vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. Your relationship is acrimonious from there on out.
Yeah.
So these owner applications, you know, Ford's is Ford Pass and Lincoln's is Lincoln Way, and then, you know, every auto manufacturer has one now, is one of the first truly digital experiences that they have that interact with the owners of their vehicles. And that was what, you know, step one of a much larger transformation with Ford that we had done. 2015 was
Super interesting just on that point, right? Like Ford, like I could just imagine what their customer acquisition costs are. Like if we just try to put it into our software SaaS terms, right? Like their customer acquisition costs are through the roof. And then how do you start?
Well, I'll pause you right there, right?
Yeah.
Like, watch any event, whether it's a sporting event or you know, a live event anywhere. Ford's probably a sponsor.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right. So there's part of the branding, and, you know, to Ford's credit, it's the most trusted brand in the world, right? So that's one of the greatest things we have going for it. I would say one of the most trusted, and probably the trusted one in America post 2008. So then, you know, started that, and I think 2015 peak car hit, and I was like, you know, we're not going to sell more cars on a linear slope, right? Things have to change, and three vectors of innovation started happening in the auto industry. On demand became obviously pervasive, so the ride hailing,
Mm-hmm.
which, you know, would be Lyft or Uber, or pick any of the variants.
Sure.
Electrification of vehicles. You know, Tesla was really starting to make not onesie twosies, but thousands, tens of thousands, 100,000 vehicles a year, and now they're crushing it. And then autonomy. So the autonomous element of vehicles. So if you put hailing, electrification, and autonomy all in kind of this one bucket, that was really the three things that would ignite the changes for the auto industry over the next decade. Really, I was like, hey, we can help with that transition, and, you know, discussed it thoroughly inside of Ford, and Ford was really gung ho. They're really excited. They're like, hey, we need entrepreneurs like you to go work on these problems and help us move to that next rung. And that's when Autonomic was born. You know, Ford was a customer day one of you know, our slides, because we had slides at the time. And
Right.
in
You guys had the vision. You guys had the vision that you brought.
You know, we you know, in October we gave 100 days to ourselves, and, you know, kudos to the team. So, you know, there was, you know, Gavin, Sherry, Nitin Rao, Ben Black, you know, Caleb, Sonny, myself, right? We really, you know, put our heads together to really get this thing going. And, you know, 100 days, we had a product, we had a trial going. We had revenue the second that trial hit. In our first year, we had 8 figures of revenue, and we were in the midst at the end of the first year signing a 9-figure contract.
Wow.
Yeah, and in the midst of working through that 9-figure contract, which was very interesting, exciting, the procurement people who I'd been working with at Ford Motor Company politely declined some meetings for me, and I was like, okay, something's weird. And
that must have scared you at one point too.
Yeah, you know, like,
what's going on here?
Kind of want this thing to happen, and then the discussion kind of switched from buying our product in, you know, 3-5 year increments, or, you know, annual increments, to let's talk about a buy it all. And it was like an eBay buy it now discussion, and that was exciting. So it was like maybe a 15-month journey to do that, from starting to, you know, acquisition being announced. And, you know, that's been exciting. We've been there now over 2 years. So every vehicle that comes off the Ford production line now connects to through a modem to a cloud, and that cloud is the Autonomic Car Cloud. And in that car cloud, we power all the microservices for you know, anything based on connectivity.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
And so that brings you to today. And so what is your role now at, is it with Ford? Is it with Autonomic?
Yeah, so so as part of the deal, we did 2 things. One, we created the vector for Autonomic to get 100% coverage of all the vehicles. Then the other thing we did is we really wanted to leverage our knowledge of how to do innovation in large corporations. So that's part of the FordX initiative where I'm part of. If you look back in 2010, we did a joint venture with a company called IAC Interactive Corp.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, IAC was moving a lot of its web properties, which I think they had 50 at the time. Stuff you've heard, like, they used to have
Ask G,
Ask Jeeves,
dictionary.com.
Dictionary.com, Urban Spoon, City Search. Those were a generation ago of names, right? And those were moving to mobile. And really, they realized that their entire business, their ad business, was moving into mobile, and that was something that was just, they wanted to go beyond just doing mobile versions of their existing properties. So they wanted to innovate on doing net new mobile properties.
Mm-hmm.
And through there, we had 10 projects, 9 of which were, not very successful. You never heard of them. And then the 10th one was a recycling of the 8th team into a project called Tinder.
Right.
Tinder's obviously grown up. It's, the Match Group is now public, worth tens of billions of dollars. And that's kind of the knowledge we had that we wanted to share. So we created this FordX entity inside of Ford, and that's basically a similar framework that we've applied to, modern day. Obviously, times have changed, industries change, so we have to, change with it. So that's what we're doing now inside of Ford.
Very cool. Very cool. So so Sonny's working with you. You guys are still tied at the hip.
It's interesting.
Don't break the dynamic duo up.
we've been working together. Over 12, 13 years now, right? And it's interesting that a lot of founders and groups don't do that, right? And that's been something special for me. And I'm, you can ask him, but I'm sure it's the same for him.
Well, it's Sunday, April 19th, and Jordan's documentary is out. There's Jordan Pippin being watched all over the place while you and I film this. This is the beginning of the documentary for you guys, I guess. That's going to come out because there's a dynamic duo there, for sure. All right, so that brings us to today. So FordX's initiative, you guys are looking to invest in what type of company?
Look, I think I mentioned the 3 vectors, right? On-demand, electrification, and autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
If those are truly going to happen, how is that going to change the auto industry and the transportation world? Because our initiative now, before all the pandemic, like selling another vehicle is good, but it's incremental value. How do we really provide people larger value? So think of it in context of different measurements, not necessarily vehicle volume or service parts or any of those things. Like think of it in, if I could get you back 30 minutes in your day through transportation, what would you do for that? And obviously you're seeing it now.
Some of the worst time in the day is just sitting in traffic, right? Like
frustration. It's hard. Like
frustrating, anxiety-driven time.
There's an epic
uptime on.
Bill Ford, who's the great grandson of the founder of Ford, but he did an epic TED talk talking about we don't need to sell more cars. And this was well ahead of its time. He's seemingly from what you might
someone with the last name Ford to say we don't need to sell more cars is pretty controversial. Right?
So obviously we look at it and go, how do we save time? How do we save frustration, right? Because if you can get to the core problems people are having, then the solutions are looked at differently, right? Mm-hmm. Like do I need a new car this year? Maybe not. Right? Mm-hmm. Would I like to get 15 minutes back on my way into work and my way back to work? Great. Absolutely. I'd love that. When can I sign up for that? How much can I pay for it? Through this whole pandemic, you're realizing that your commute time is 0. Mm-hmm. And what's that worth to you? Mm-hmm. Right? There's obviously other elements around it, but what's the 0 commute time worth to you? And these are the types of things that we're exploring and trying to really bring to the forefront. And that's a combination of a bunch of different things. And there's delivery, there's and delivery has itself 10 different categories within it, right? Delivery of people, delivery of packages, delivery of heavy packages, delivery of pizza. Like you just kind of go through the whole thing. And, I think one of the challenges is when we look at it as an industry to go change one of these paradigms, we sometimes try and change too many variables at once. And, if you think back to doing stuff in software, you kind of want to do incremental changes, A/B test things, and figure out what's working, what's not working. And I think that's one of the keys that we're looking at.
That's pretty cool. I mean, just to draw some parallels from just the conversation that we've been having right now, something that I just learned myself just from talking to you today. When you left Vengrowth and started saying, hey, there's a ecosystem here that could be a platform play. Sounds very similar to what you guys are doing at Forward X. Is like, how do you leverage Forward as like a platform, right?
I got to tell you, I got lucky early in my career. I worked on this, at this company called Cypress Semiconductor in San Jose, and I worked on this team that was stuck in the corner. We were kind of nobodies, and we worked on the computer interface group. This ended up being USB 1.0.
Oh, wow.
So we went from folks in a corner that thought, and dude, we were connecting mice and keyboards at best, right? We weren't even sure, like we were trying to replace drivers and stuff and mice, keyboards, peripherals. You'd go to these USB plug fests.
You reminded me of those nightmare days of where's that disc? I don't have the driver.
Right. And then it was like pens, and I had worked at ATI before, so I knew all the drivers. It was such a mess, right? Like these are just types of things we looked at. So, and then like that group went from a few of us in the corner to just a massive department. I remember with the was it the eMac? Apple was I went to a meeting at Apple, and classic Apple story. They're like, we want to buy everything you have, and we're willing to pay you your cost, right? It was like one of those discussions. Right. But the whole point in that, in eMac ended up being all USB, right? And now USB 2, USB 3, USB-C, it's on every electronic device. And to me, to see that from infancy all the way through is amazing. And the whole point is that these were platforms where at each juncture, developers said, hey, we're going to change the underlying, transport to make it higher throughput, more reliable, higher power. And then just each evolution has been developers kind of going at it and just, making it go of it. And it's just, that's what I've seen repeat history over and over and over again. Yeah. And that's been really great to see.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Okay, Amar, let's switch gears. We're in the middle of a pandemic right now, and you've had the experience of going through 2001, the dot-com crisis, 2000, the dot-com crisis, 2001, September 11th, 2008, financial crisis, and now 2020. What are some of the things that you've learned?
Okay, this is a great question. So I want to kind of give this some thought here, and I'm never one to give personal advice because I'm not or financial advice. I'm just not qualified to do it. But I'll share with you my experience, my learning, and it kind of cuts across both your personal life and your professional life. And these are just things that I've observed, I've learned. I, for better or worse, saw the really high highs of the 90s in Silicon Valley and the low lows of the early 2000s in Silicon Valley. And that was
highs of I just registered a .com, I'm IPOing.
It was just to put some context, and I think this is helpful color just to go back a bit. There were times where the San Jose Mercury News, which was the de facto tech geek paper that you'd read online or get delivered.
TechCrunch before TechCrunch.
Yeah, sure. They would measure vacancy rates at place in cities by percentage. Generally, it's done by percent, right? The vacancy rate in Santa Clara County today is such and such, right? It started being produced as a number. because there were so few units.
Mhm.
And basically, you would
There
have to
are
go to
3
places.
vacancies in Santa Clara County.
Exactly, right? You'd literally have to go. You'd have to have like a check in hand. You'd have to sign up at the time, and it was like, right? And then like every second car was a port. Like it was just ended up being something just ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, how do I get to that site, right?
Hmm.
And I always remember thinking like, that just seemingly happened fast to a lot of people, and I'm grateful for them, but like I didn't understand it. Well, good news was I got my lesson real fast. So basically, as the dot-com crash happened, the effects of 9/11 lingered, like it rotated real fast. You started seeing a lot of exodus, a lot of cars abandoned, vacancy rates went way up,
Hmm.
um, and it was just interesting to see that people who had lived there for a decade plus understood it because they'd been through the 90s, early 90s, and
Hmm.
kind of the big recession then. So I got to tell you, I was fortunate to be young, which helped.
Fortunate enough to fail and still learn from it and
It's to
adapt
learn
that
and not
throughout
have
your
it. Like,
career.
let me
Yeah.
give you a real crisp example. So Jetstream had filed to go public. All of the early employees wrote checks to exercise their stock options so that they would avoid paying the tax between the exercise price and the IPO price, which would be a huge discrepancy.
Huge, yeah.
So they ended up,
But there's risk to that.
well, here's the risks. At the time, they ended up exercising probably above their exercise price and below the perceived IPO price. So they paid taxes, the AMT.
Hmm.
And that's tax you paid in hopes that you'd save a bunch of tax going forward. That was the good news. The bad news was if you never got that event in the future, which the company never went public, you paid that tax to the government, never got it back, and it was a big deal.
And in order to pay that tax, I mean, I'm guessing if you're working at a startup, you don't got a bankroll just to be
Well,
able to
yeah,
pay
look,
that tax.
we had a lot of well-heeled individuals in the company. They'd come from 3Com, they'd come from Cisco, they'd come from places like that. The challenge was if you didn't do the early exercise, then you had to pay tax when it went public, which was an even bigger bill.
Right.
So you'd
Right.
have to sell a bunch of shares in order to pay the tax. It was like this
Hmm.
this perverse calculation.
Hmm.
So a bunch of people went and took out second mortgages on their home. Had multiple kids and were just chugging along like normal life, and took these second mortgages out, going, "Don't worry, next year I'll pay it off or whatever." And that never happened. The lingering effects of that second mortgage and the stock never going public and being worth anything has stuck with those people for decades.
Yeah.
And that to me was always a stark realization back then, going, whoa, like you can make one move that's out of your control or that's in your control that could be bad because of circumstances that are out of your control.
Right.
So I think the first thing to do is to realize that things that happen in your life come in two categories: things you can control and things you cannot. And what we realize today is us all being at home is probably something that's not in our control. We can't just say, hey, this pandemic's over, we're leaving. So that's an event that's out of your control. The events that are in your control, though, are what you do given the circumstance. So let's talk about the personal life. I think you've probably, if anybody hasn't, and there's probably a lot of people who hasn't, should go read some of these, personal finance books. They're probably a couple-hour read. They're less than 100 pages. They're boring. Sometimes they're with a good story. But these are just, and
Yeah,
there's a
the
bunch of
rich,
great
rich,
blogs on this
rich
too.
dad, poor dad. There's the wealthy
Rich Dad, Poor
barber.
Dad, just Wealthy Barber, just things like that. But okay, so systematic, unsystematic, things you control,
Hmm.
things you can't control. How you react, how you act is all on you. Your attitude through all this is all on you, right? And I think having the right attitude through this is critical. And then the other thing that comes to shine is in times when people are pushed, their true core fabric comes to surface right away. So, people were, integrity is the biggest thing you can have during these times. And those who are shying away or struggling from showing it or stuff, you really should peel the onion a few layers on there, going, well, if you don't have that integrity now, like when is that coming, right? You need to really reset your expectations of those people in your life personally. Then there's
I say this right now, and I say this to the tribe all the time. I'm like, hey, alone, my back's against the wall, and alone, I'm not going to be able to fight through this. But with everybody else around me, if we all feel like our back is against the wall, all of us together, banding together, could use this as an opportunity to really stick together and fight through this and actually win. Right.
If you want to walk far, walk with others, right? Like that's the classic line. So just on the personal front, right? Like I think this has really given me a chance to not reconnect, but further emphasize how important family is and being with family. And it's the moments that you're there with the family, right? Like being in the moment, having the experiences, explaining to young children why we're at home. One doesn't care because he's so excited he doesn't have to go to school. The other wants to go see his friends. Like it's just this classic, and it's hilarious. So we're
having to homeschool them. It's like I'm sure you're scratching your head going, what?
Like the reason the Zoom didn't work is the kids' accounts were all logged in, right? Do that. Anyway, so just that family time is super critical, and the core values you have as a family are super important, and that energy radiates through tough times, good times, through times where you spend a lot of time, when times you don't spend a lot of time, right? And I think that experience and that core bond is super critical. People talk about social distancing. I have some friends who are social distancing at home because they've never been home, right? Like,
I'm one of them. I think one of the jokes I said to you was, wow, I'm home, and it's actually kind of nice. I never realized Michelle did such a great job with this place because I've never spent time here.
So these are just things that are super critical, super important. On the financial side of things, like a couple of weeks for a lot of people could really knock them out, right? Yeah. And if if you're young, you're probably not super established, that can be devastating. That'll force you to have to probably move out of your apartment, maybe sell your car, maybe, just start thinking about things that you weren't really thinking about. And that mindset that'll hopefully shift your mindset into like, okay, I've got to be able to set myself up to weather a storm like this. So the classic thing I always read about was, have the emergency fund, right? Like Susie Orman talks about it. I'm trying to remember if hers is 6 months or, whatever that is for you. It can't be days, it can't be weeks. It's got to be months, 3, 6, 9. You pick a year if you're really conservative, right? These are just types of things that people should start thinking about. That doesn't mean get your paycheck, stuff it under your pillow, but like you just got to think, if an event like this happens, am I prepared? Will I have to change things? Because you have to think.
I mean, there's a lot of people in this right now who don't have the DeLorean with the flex capacitor to go back and So they're in a tough position now.
This is something that if you had known 6 months ago would really, and you're in this bracket, and it's really tough. I totally emphasize, and having been there, it was a tough time for me because I thought, times are good, things are going to go only up, and to see it go down and how fast and how and it doesn't discern who you are. It just does it, right? It doesn't.
But it's tough. It's tough. I remember I had Farhan on the podcast earlier this week. We were talking about the times we've been fired, or the times we've got put on PIPs, or what happened to us when we actually got laid off or let go in the organizations that we were in. And it's tough. It's tough for you to not take that personally. It's tough for you to think, like, forget your self-worth.
Yeah. So I think you always have to keep in the attitude of everything here, right? Like you've got to keep your self-worth intact, because the second you start losing confidence in yourself of who you are and what you can do, everybody's going to see that. It's going to get amplified. And, it's okay to question things, but you really got to be confident in yourself through this. And you might even be wrong on a few things, and that's okay.
That's okay.
Because there is an ego hit, right? Like you did something great, and then all of a sudden it falls on the other side of the curve, and it's falling, and you're like, oh my God. And you keep thinking sometimes about what it was, but you really keep having to look forward of what it can be. Mm-hmm. And that's the toughest thing for human psyche to go through this, right? And it just, you're going to sit on your couch some days going, geez, this is so hard. What's going on? Why not? Why not? And then the quicker you're able to deal with that, compartmentalize it, come back to it if you need to when you want, but really able to move forward without that as part of the drag on your day to day, the better off you're going to be. And it's easy to say, hard to do. And I
It's
get
hard to do, dude. I'm telling you. I mean, for me, so I got laid off. Funny enough, I got brought back again because it happens at companies during recessions, and they say, hey, you know what? You were an asset, come back. And then I get let go again because they still can't afford you. And it got tough. I was talking to Farhan about this. A bunch of things happened in my life at that moment. But like you were saying, when you're on that couch, you got to start looking at the next step. I mean, being trapped in your own mind, laying there it's just a recipe for disaster.
well, dude, I'll give you my story, right? So
Sure.
I had a roommate at the time. He skipped out of town.
Mm-hmm.
So rent doubled. I wasn't making money. And, so luckily I was young. I had a car payment, rent.
You can get by on cornflakes if you needed to.
And I had super helpful friends. My friends at the time were super supportive. And I'll never forget any of those times that they offered to help and do all those things and just, cared. They listened, they cared.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just really awesome for that. But the reality of it is that if you're not, like, nobody's ever going to teach you and prepare you for this stuff. You kind of have to read some stuff or live through it and go, I'm never making those mistakes again, right? And I think that if you don't have the right attitude, if you haven't set yourself up to be financially flexible through these short bursts of downturns, you're really going to put yourself in a tough spot. Because the next thing I want to talk about is routine, right? Like, you need to
Before
have
you
regular
get there, I
routine.
mean, before you get into routine, I think this is something you and I, as we chat, you were talking about, let's say you did screw up on all those areas. You've been let go, you don't have the savings, you don't
Yeah.
have all these things. I think your routine concept and notion is super important, because even if you are in that bad position,
Yeah.
talk about routine and like why
Yeah.
routine.
Just to add one thing to my story, and this is just my story, and it's easy to tell because it's me. Like, I had an H-1B visa at the time.
All right.
So I wasn't even able to go
Get
work.
deported.
I wasn't even able to go work. Like, literally, as a joke, a friend of mine brought me a Starbucks application. He's like, "Hey, you should fill this out. Go do something." And he's like, "Oh, you're not eligible."
You can't
Right?
do
Like,
it.
it was just,
Yeah, you
it
can't
was just,
do it.
it was just
Starbucks
like
is not going to
everything.
take your H-1B on.
Yeah, everything was just kind of falling backwards, right? And I was like, whoa. And stuff can really get reset very fast when in these downturns, because it's not about you, it's about the systems at those point, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, routine is really critical, right? I remember having sleepless nights. I wasn't eating properly. Forget exercising, but it created a lot of binge behavior. You want to just. I remember binge watching TVs. This is before prominence of Netflix, but like, there were 3 movies I watched in one day. One was Reality Bites, Fight Club, and then Office Space, right? And
Office
and and,
Space
and
is
I
one of the classic
and I watched all 3 of those, and I'm like, man, the work world is a cynical place, right? And it really
ones.
helped me get myself to that next level. And I find that, if you can't get through some of the binge behavior, you're going to get stuck in a lot of that, whether it's TV, drugs, alcohol, whatever it is, right?
I
And it's,
mean, the drugs and alcohol thing is like super real, right? I mean, you see the jokes, say, and the memes and stuff of everybody saying, "Hey, yeah, you're home. You don't know." It's kind of like being in Vegas. You got no money and you're drinking at any point. It's okay. It's not okay. You can't be drinking at any point.
Look, I don't mean to laugh to make light of it, right? It's a serious thing. So it's like, if you're not able to carry out a routine, it's going to be tough, right? And I think the good news now is access isn't an impediment, right? Like, anybody can get online and do something, meditation, exercise, pick your thing, right? Watch, like, this routine is hard, easy to say, hard to do, right? Like, I struggle with it on days too. And then the other thing I find is difference between then and now is social media has become this new, I call it the new smoking, right? So, like, people really spend a lot of time going through it to pass time. And I'm like, okay, great. But then they start, trying to find time to eke stuff out. And I find people with kids and I, are the ones that are guilty of this, myself probably included. You're on your phones instead of being involved in the moment, right? And that's a really tough one to get past.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, people talk about that all the time. It's been amplified through this because there's, just extra emphasis on the time, extra emphasis on the, everybody's posting stuff now. So it's really tough. It's really tough.
I mean, there's study after study that talks about the addiction rates and the, dopamine that's getting released with social media and the effects of it. And it obviously isn't healthy. Anything that's not done in moderation is obviously not healthy, even if it's exercise. If you just,
right.
If you're too
and
much
I think the hardest thing here, because everybody's going through some level of ups and downs here. The toughest thing is to realize, this isn't a decision you made. This isn't happening because of a decision you made, right? Like you didn't cause this, right? And I think people struggle with that. I'm so usually in control of my day in terms of time, in terms of what I do, and all of that's gone, right? And I think people really struggle with, man, I've worked so hard in life to get to a place, da, 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 da. I'm like, yeah, like you can't control some things. And that's just one of the hardest things to realize in life, right? And I think it's definitely one of those things that's been amplified here.
I think the attitude also of that helped me since the dark place I was in after that 2001 year was starting to look at the glass half full, start to find the opportunity in the chaos, start to look at, hey, you know what? You're up every morning. What are you going to do today that's going to actually make something impactful for tomorrow? And it could be small things. It's like you don't move a mountain overnight, right? You do it piece by piece. And so you got to start looking at what are going to be the like 5 to 6 things that you're going to do today that are going to help you towards a better tomorrow.
Yeah, checklists are great for that. Even if it's like, get up at a certain time, do a few small chores. That just helps get the mind thinking to get into some stuff. But everybody's going through that struggle on their own. I got to tell you that the good news out of all of that was it really helped me focus and sharpen my desire and like, what is it I want to do, right? And it really helped me. What was my end goal? What was really my calling, my passion, and entrepreneurship was really in that bucket, and that it really helped, I guess, put into focus more, or that was something I wanted to do, and that was super helpful for me. And so,
there's something to be said about recessions, and I just said the words opportunity and chaos, but look how many innovative companies actually come out of recessions. This is where innovation happens, right?
And these innovations change.
We'll be on the right side of that.
Yeah, look, innovation. These downturns change the frameworks in which we operate. Mm-hmm. Like it's not going to change 80% of the things, but it's long term going to change at least 5, 10, maybe 15% of how we do.
I think this has changed something pretty big here. Where working remotely and being able to get things done that you need to get in your life without having to wait in lines or having to go into a bank and sit down with somebody and go, like, there's a lot of things that need to start getting automated or need to happen in a much easier way, where the status quo before never wanted to change because that's just the way they always done it. But this forced you to say, you ain't going to do it that way anymore.
You ain't doing it that way anymore. And to me, this has just been like like in all other downturns, this will really provide opportunity for folks, right? Like the internet changed after the .com crash. It became social.
Yeah.
Right. After the 08 crisis, things changed again, right? And mobile really took off.
It became mobile, yeah. I mean, if you look at the companies that came out of that, you got Twitter, Foursquare, the list goes on and on and on. Tinder, obviously, all the stuff that came out with the wave of mobile and how prominent mobile became after the financial crisis.
Yeah. So then you look at this and you're like, okay, kind of rewrite the book, right? Scrap everything. Go, what's going to change? What's going to happen? What's needed? What's not? Right? And, the bunch. Take a look at the memes that get sent around, and obviously a lot of them are just jokes, but some of them are real. Like, what's become really important. Everybody's coffee fix is still there.
Mm-hmm.
Their car fix is less, right? Like these are just realities. We kind of joke about them, but they're true.
Yeah.
So I think these are things that are going to change and reset. And I think there's hope for everybody, right? Like don't give up hope. Don't panic. This too will pass. And I'm sure people are going through really tough and incredibly tough situations and times here, whether it's by themselves, with family, for family members, all that kind of stuff, right? Like parents, kids, all that kind of stuff, friends, somebody maybe who's been affected by this, people who are doctors. It's tough, right? Like it's beyond words how tough this can be. But there will be time after this, and how you plan to spend your time through this and after this is really important. And I think if you're doing something today, which most people who are probably watching this are, you really must further focus yourself with surgeon-like precision in doing what you're doing.
Yep.
Because if you're not able to do that always, and especially in this time frame, things are going to get worse. There was 20 million people claiming unemployment in the U.S. in the last few weeks.
Scary.
In Canada,
it's very scary.
It's getting up there too. And one of the things that I remember going to was a talk put on by the guy. His name was I want to say Vivek Raghavan. He was the Redback CEO at the time. Redback was a prominent telco equipment company way back in the day.
Okay.
And he did a thing at a talk, and he talked about his topic that day wasn't about all of his accomplishments. It was how to make sure you're not on the list.
Yeah, so that was I was gonna ask you about that. Every entrepreneur and every manager and every boss right now is getting tremendous pressure for budgets and has to reevaluate their teams. And so you call it the cut list.
Yes. So
how do you keep your name off? You have had thousands of people who've come under you.
Yeah.
Who've been indirectly or directly reporting to you. How do you, what does Sheetal have to do when I worked with you? I'm sure I did a lot to make sure I should be on a cut list, but what did I do to make sure you didn't cut me? Like, what do you have to do?
All kidding aside, to this time, people really have to look at their outlook. Do they have money to get through this time frame? And it's not just startups, right? You're seeing Fortune 100 companies. Ford just went out and raised $8 billion this week, right? Like these are, everybody's having to look at this. So how do you make sure you're not on the cut list? Well, look, it goes back to a couple of things. One, your attitude. Two, there's some things you can control and some things you cannot control. You cannot control how deep your company has to cut because of simple financial physics.
Yeah.
We need to get to this dollar number. That's the system. So if that number is 0, well then great. If that number is a big number, yeah, you're going to be above or below the line by system. Mm-hmm. Where you can help yourself is on the fringe. I remember, going through these cut lists over my career and just people get passive aggressive on these things. They come back to their memory and they had the amygdala response. And the amygdala response is, in my head, I really just don't like that person for something they did. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's usually not work related. It's usually not performance related. It's like, that person, doesn't put their mug back properly in the rack, or
it could be anything.
It could be anything, right? And I just remember there was a guy.
That person doesn't say hi to me, go straight into their cubicle or whatever it is.
And I got to tell you, some of the best lessons I've learned is watching and observing people do like terrible character things. And this happened in the one of the cuts that I went through. People just had this amygdala response. They just overreacted, said, no, this person's got to be on there, and they made it a mission to go get these people off their teams. Mm-hmm. And you see it sometimes in the annual, cut 10% stuff. But when you see deep cuts like this, people just get very passive aggressive. Mm-hmm. Because the output of the response to cut somebody is usually driven from a place that's not, not warranted, not granted. They'll make stuff up. Sure. And especially as startups are, they're very fluid, they're very fragile.
I almost feel startups have the opposite problem where it's like, we don't want to cut, we can't cut, like trying to find every, I don't know. I think even like when you got to look at the financial viability of your company at a certain point, I made the mistake, last year, and I will, which I openly talked about on another episode, but I made the mistake last year that I probably never cut deep enough. And so there's a fine balance there too, where, you fight to keep the people because you actually truly love them and you work with them and you see a ton of value they add, but at the time of your business and where you are in the business, it might not make sense.
I think startups generally tend to be lean, which is probably why there's a bit more veracity about keeping these people.
Yep.
I feel like when there's somebody that's going to be on the gray area of that cut list, it ends up being a bit of a personal thing, which is wrong from a performance perspective, but plays into a few things. What's your attitude been like? And the things that you can control, how is your work? How is your, these are two things you control, and those go a long way, right? You can't control which teams or, how deep the cuts go, because that's, system thing, but you can control who and why. Right. And you got to avoid getting in that, passive aggressive outcome. Let me talk quickly on cuts, because we've all been through it. They're hard, they're tough, they're difficult. We've all been downsized, upsized, all that kind of stuff. Generally speaking, people wait too long to cut and don't cut deep enough. Yep. Very rarely, 6 months after a cut, do people go, man, I really missed that.
Yeah.
It's unemotional. It's cyborg-like to say that.
It's ripping the Band-Aid off slow. It's
the truth. Yeah. It's the harsh reality of truth, and people usually don't want to hear it because they're like, man, they don't want to do the hard thing, right? And I think that's what makes great operators great, whether it's in good times or bad times, that they can make those decisions, right? And knowing when you've got something that as tough as it is, it's not the right thing. That is that's when somebody's becoming world class, when they can start doing those things. Because when you see that, you see a level of maturity, you see a thinking process, an understanding of what the future should look like, and just kind of a real systems-based analysis of how this stuff goes. And that to me is really, you want to fast forward your career, get involved in that process. Right. You'll really start learning it. So that's to me kind of how to deal with it. That's the advice I generally want to share with people. It's like, get in a room with the right decision makers, air out all your grievances, but don't make the passive aggressive move. Make the moves that make sense and are unemotional.
Fair enough. And the episode with Farhan, he had a lot of tactical things that he talked about. Like, hey, if you are getting cut, well, he was saying, even if you are getting cut, or if you're on that cut list, perhaps there's a way you could say, hey, is there another area that I can add value in? I know there's a problem over here that I could go solve. Why don't I go do that? Buy yourself a couple of weeks, because if you found the area that there's a problem and you have a solution for that area that has a problem, then sure, go do it, because we actually do have work for you, and you're solving something that the company needs to have solved anyway.
Well-run, well-functioning teams generally have some kind of stack rank list of everyone. We did it at XtremeLabs.
It's also the Jack Welch way, right? From
the Gut was a great book. If you rest in peace. But it's a great book to really talk about talent. We had a list. We go through it, and then when we had the hard discussions, we kind of knew where people were in terms of rank, who we needed, what we needed, who could be moved to different groups. So yeah, those things do ring true. I'm glad you brought those up, because it was.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was shocked the first time someone at TribalScale, I'll say the TribalScale story, was surprised that there was a rank list. Why am I being ranked on a list? This is the way it works. It's a harsh reality, but you constantly have to do that. Well-run teams do that, because I think I look at it a couple of ways. I look at it, hey, if you got a large team, or even a medium-sized team, and what are you going to do for those top performers? Those, like, let's say there's 3 top performers. What could you do to put more fuel on their fire? And if there's people who are underperforming, what are you going to do to help lift them up now that you've identified it? If you just paint everybody with the same paintbrush, you can't do that.
Right.
And so I think it's super important to have a proper rank list so you can do some of these good things.
I got to tell you two things. One is, I think most high performing teams do have this set up, whether at a big company like Microsoft. I remember at Cypress, we had a brutal one, right? It was like at the bottom 2 people in your team never got pay raises, right? Like it was like just a brutal system, right? Like it was one of those types. But and they were always giving outsized bonuses or pay increases to the folks in the top quartile, right? It was very meritocratic that way. I tried to follow some of those things over time, but what really tells me this is that if you're unaware that there's a rank list on a well-run company, it's kind of probably a fundamental understanding of people's fiscal responsibilities. I can tell you, anybody who's ever worked in any of the companies that I can tell you what my expectation of that person was, when they joined, where they came from, what their salary was, because I went through every candidate before they got hired to understand what we were doing, where they fit, and I'd monitor that quite often.
You were pretty on ball with the numbers too. I mean, I can speak from my experience where you'd be like, "Hey, come here. You got room to do more. I expect more from you, and you're doing well, but there's a gap here, and you identified." And I really quickly do some self-reflection too. And he's right. There is opportunity here that I'm missing. I should go and be better.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of a different.
I mean, that's kind of like 1 minute manager stuff, the way you did that, but yeah.
Yeah, there's broader context there, right? Like, I think you want to get, in a startup where everybody's kind of learning and evolving, you want to get people, turned up a notch every time you can to really understand what they're capable of. Because a lot of people come to startups not knowing what they're capable of. And they're like, I'm there because some really smart people came here and I think we could do great things. But what can you do? What should you be doing? And I think sometimes people need just a reminder that, what they're doing is great, but they could be doing things either smarter, faster, more.
In all fairness, that happened to you too when you started working at Pivotal, and it was like, wait, you're doing great stuff, right? You were just saying the story. Well, Paul Lawrence was like, hey, you're doing great stuff. Or was it Bill? You were saying Bill was saying, you're doing great stuff. Like, think much bigger. What are you having to do?
Your lens 1, lens 2 on a optometrist is way off, right? Like, you're thinking about it wrong. So I think everybody needs that. High performers, low performers. And really, one of the reasons people probably do join startups, at least for me, was I wanted to work in high performing groups, teams with smart people, and I wanted to see what I was capable of. I wanted to see how I could push myself, right? And if you're not getting that from the top in terms of being able to understand how high the expectations are without it feeling overwhelming, then maybe you're not at the right place, right? Like that's kind of my just unfiltered advice on that.
I wanted us to switch gears a little bit. Let's put your investor hat back on. So you're still an avid investor. You're still looking to invest in startups personally. This is not through FordX. What is it that you look for an investor? And are people even still writing checks right now in this middle of this pandemic?
Yeah. So you go back to our initial, why did I ever look to join a VC firm? This is one of those, like, when they didn't need money, the money showed up, and when you did need money, everybody fled for the hills.
Yeah.
This is probably one of the most challenging environments that we've had in the last decade, and it's been, very recently very frothy to raise money. You're seeing a bunch of, SBA loans in the US. You're seeing some stuff from the IRAP and BDC launched here. The sad truth is startup companies are going to feel this wrath of this pandemic quite heavily. And part of it is stuff they can control. Part of it's probably stuff they can't control. Most of it's probably stuff they can't control. But when you get yourself into the startup game to do these things, like, you're open to the ebbs and flows, ups and downs of these market environments.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, raising money is going to be even tougher because every professional investor today is triaging their portfolio of investments to figure out who can we help. And those are easy. Those are in the top right bucket. Folks, we can help.
So by
Then
triaging,
they're
you're
like,
saying by triaging, you mean I already got a portfolio of investments. I know they're going to need more cash.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
going to
So
help them
they're,
first.
and how these funds work is they invest and then they allocate money for further investment down the road, right? So, top right is we're going to back these companies up all the way, no problem. You know, bottom left is like, meh, these companies aren't going to make it, and it's unfortunate, but that's just how they think about it. And in the middle, there's this area again of how to be on the list, not on the list, right? Where you're like,
Mm-hmm.
is it worth putting more money into this company, or am I spending good money after bad?
Right.
And that again ends up being hopefully an unemotional analytic element of it versus it being a passive aggressive, like, I really don't like this company. I don't like how it's working. Like last board meeting, this happened. Like you really have to be on point with the analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the firms are doing that now. They're kind of triaging, trying to figure out what to do, how to do it. And then once they get through that, then they can start looking at new deals again. But like most investors looking to do new deals want to meet the management team in person.
Right.
That's usually a
I mean,
checkbox item.
even from a business development standpoint, one of my biggest aces up my sleeve is actually being able to meet someone face to face and
Yeah.
have that connection to actually get a deal done. And doing it over Zoom is fine. It's good. It's just not the same.
It's not the same,
It's not
right?
the same.
It's not what we're accustomed to and used to.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you know, it's just been probably a checklist item for everybody. Like, go meet the teams, and if you've we'll get to books in a bit, but one of the books now is Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. And in this book, he just talks about how judges and doing bail hearings are about as accurate or less accurate than computers, right?
Mm-hmm.
They want to see the person, they want to understand it, but the reality is they're less accurate than computers in some of the studies they've done, right? This is one of
Sure.
those classic things. But
Leave it to Malcolm Gladwell to find these things. I
yeah,
don't
so in early stage startup investments though, right, like there's still that element of I may not live in the same area, I may always be remote or maybe a phone call with this person, but I do need to physically meet them, right? Like, and I don't know what it is that they have to articulate it, but like maybe this changes the game a bit, and it's like you know you don't meet the investors and they come to you, and I don't know how that would work.
We don't know what that formula looks like. It might be good. You never know. It might take some of the bias or stuff out of it, out of good
Well,
founders.
if you think about it, right, like people who do Angels List or things like that, like
Mm-hmm.
you generally never meet the teams, but you're relatively small amount of the investment in the company, which is why you're kind of just backing up the
Yeah.
truck on the idea. You're not really doing much
Well,
else,
listen,
right?
I mean, when you're doing an AngelList deal, you're generally looking at somebody else is doing all your due diligence. You outsource your due diligence at that
Right,
point.
right.
Right.
So I think in terms of investing, it's super hard to get new money. It always is. Markets have been frothy the last couple of years. Like investments in early rounds have become very expensive, and now it's hopefully gonna, keep the ones that are really have a shot at making it, being resilient, can get over the hump, and others are gonna fall. And then I think for early stage investments, the rules are getting reset slightly. And then for ones that need more money, the valuation expectations need to be there, right? Like I think you need to be realistic with what you can expect. If you raise that uncapped convertible note to start your company, that's not there now, right? Like maybe it is, but I don't think that's a prudent investment in this market, right?
So
I never thought it was, and I don't.
do you see down rounds happening? Are going to start happening?
Down rounds are subjective because the valuation is one component, one element of an overall investment, right? There's liquidation rights, there's boards, there's voting, there's this, that, and the other, right? So valuation is just one. Like, you saw the Airbnb, maybe you didn't, but maybe the Airbnb debt raised with the conversion below their last financing round. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that on paper is a down round, but it's not yet, right? Like these are
Right.
just, it's a bit difficult. Like the down rounds that you start seeing now are the draconian ones where it's like, okay, well, you were valued at 100 before, now you're at 10, and all the investment is 9, so the employees own 1, and those are just terrible situations,
Mm-hmm.
but that usually don't yield good outcomes. They kind of end up being a dog's breakfast.
But it's also I think one of the naive things that we definitely see right now is like, hey, this company raised so much money, but they just let go of 50% of their staff, and they still got to extend their runway. Just because they raised that doesn't
Yeah,
doesn't.
look, I think this is hard for people to see. Like, let's pick somebody raised 300 million earlier this year, and now they have to cut. Well, they haven't burned through the 300 million. The expectation is the 300 million was supposed to take them 18, 24 months in January. Hasn't changed in April, but the revenue prospects have come right off the table, right? So
Right.
now you have to right size your business to match the revenue outcome and expectation. And that's why you're seeing these cuts, these big companies, or larger privates, and that's why you're seeing them going, hey, we need more money, right? Like, think about Airbnb. Their business is built off travel, right? Like, you have to generally travel to go to their destinations, and that's just not happening right now.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, they
harsh.
were on track for IPO. I mean, that's what everything was pointing to. That, hey,
I gotta
Airbnb is going to be the next
give
IPO.
hats off to that team, that whole ecosystem. Like, my gut is they'll persevere and they will go public, and become a very relevant company in society. If they already are, but they will continue to be. I see them coming out at the other end. They're making a lot of good decisions here, for the future of the company.
So how about you personally? What are you going to personally do with your? Should entrepreneurs still even be bothering to get in contact with you? What should they be doing?
Oh, absolutely. I think this is a good entrepreneur and a good opportunity. Doesn't know the year, doesn't know the date, right?
Yep.
Like, that's just it. So, of course, if people are interested, I'm always interested to talk and see if I can help. You know, will I invest? I don't know, right? Like, it's gonna take an opportunity, and generally stuff to look for in this market are, always you want to look at the team behind this. You always want to look at the market they're headed into, and the waves that are riding, that they have to ride to become successful. But especially in this situation, you want to know that they have some awareness of what a downturn means and what the outcome of the downturn means. Like, I just remember after the .com era, people were still trying to do eyeballs based websites, and I'm like, that's not really a thing anymore. Or people had the next new fiber optics thing, and I'm like, there was a couple years where that as an industry went completely dark, and Google went and bought the whole thing up because it was virtually, like, not free, but it was on a severe discount.
Yep.
So, like, these are the types of things that if you're knocking on a door where nobody's inside to answer, no matter how good your mousetrap is, it doesn't matter. Analogous to trying to get in a taxi whose light's not on. It's just not going to happen, right? They're not accepting. So it's like, it's just a classic. You got to really be realistic with what can happen. And the hardest decision here for some people is to realize that because of this, my product no longer fits the target market. The market no longer exists for my product. So either I need to give up, or I need to revector with what resources I have left to find something else. And that's really tough for people.
That's hard.
Really tough.
That's hard.
Like, let's take a look, right? If you're doing really awesome stuff in travel, there's a bunch of awesome companies in travel, especially in this city. Travel's changed. Travel's changed.
Yeah, travel's changed, and you still may have the right idea and the right market, but now you got to really make some tough decisions to know: are you going to come out of this? Are you going to survive to come out of this on the other side? Right. So
right.
So that's a good transition. What do you see this post-COVID world looks like? Let's say, how do you see us opening up? How do you see us getting back to some sort of normal, what we call normal life, just prior to this pandemic?
Yeah, this is a great question.
Take us back to last month when actually I was with you, and we couldn't picture us being locked up in our houses like this right now, but here we are.
It's like,
So
here we are. So I gotta tell you, this is just my opinion, so take it with a grain of salt or whatever. We'll have a new normal, and I think how to level set that is a couple of like key questions, right? First, we have to figure out how to get this pandemic, flatten the curve, as they say, and get numbers within a striking distance. Like you're still seeing, multiple deaths in nursing homes. You're still seeing multiple cases. You're still seeing the numbers rise, and it's horrifying, right?
yeah, the numbers are still rising. I mean, I understand we flattened compared to what the model, and that kind of annoys me too, as we talk about, oh, we're doing a great job flattening it compared to what the model could have been. But the numbers are still going up. That's not really fair.
Everybody gets on now looking at Governor Cuomo's daily update with the numbers, and
I love him getting up there with his PowerPoint. Like, this guy.
He's great, but we all have a bit of sophistication with numbers, right? So is it rolling average? Like, we're not going to it's not going to be all linear stuff, right? Like, we need to really understand that we may be finding a peak, or we may be finding a local minimum, right? Like that's just the challenge of all this stuff. So look, we have to get through this, and hats off to all the the first responders, the people working in the hospital, or the nursing homes. Like, just we have a bunch of mutual friends doing this, and I hats off to them, and we're doing whatever we can to support them through this.
Yeah, the last episode ever, just so you know, we filmed was with Anna Fote, who's head of innovation, a director of innovation at Sunlife, and Dr. Pepe, who the both of them got together and have made changes happen in our healthcare system in the past month that wouldn't have happened in 5 years.
There you go.
Leveraging technology. So, like we talked about it earlier in this conversation about innovation happening at a rapid pace.
There you go. So
that's off of them.
Getting a handle on this is critical, right? So I think what we're realizing is the system is unprepared for these things, right? We don't have testing. We don't have the necessary equipment. Like, Ford now is building ventilators, right? We stopped building cars for the first time ever, right? Like, even through World Wars, we were building stuff.
Yep.
Like this is the degree and how serious this thing is. So testing, getting the numbers down, equipment, we're masks, like, just go through the list of everybody's frustration, right? Like, that is the first and foremost thing that we have to look at, and learn from there some of the issues that are there. From if we can see the other side of getting a handle on this pandemic, and Bill Gates can come out and downgrade it to something else, we can have a bit more excitement. Everybody's been forced to work from home. I'm fortunate enough to be in a role, position, job, career where I can work from home, and if this lasts indefinitely,
we're lucky most of us in the tech community are.
In tech, right? Like, we're not jumping into the hospitals every day. Like, we're blessed that we can kind of just sit and work with tools, work remotely, all that kind of stuff. That in itself created a bunch of opportunities, which everybody's seeing now, right? Like, so you have some kind of video conference, you have some kind of messaging platform, you have some kind of privacy software that enables you to do that. And now you're seeing that, right? You're seeing that percolate through the masses. Like, I think Zoom announced it had something like 200 million people active last month. It's just like 20x what they normally see, which I think is phenomenal, right?
That came at a price too, with security concerns, and there's no easy ride on the way up, right?
Right. So I think those are things that you're starting to see. Let's just go back to some of the healthcare stuff, right? So how do we prepare for a pandemic, right? Like, once we get through this, like, that requires a whole set of administration, tactical elements, and a bunch of things that need to happen that we read about daily. But the big question I have is what will be the world after all this? I ask myself, what will it take to have me be comfortable that my kids can go to school, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, the schools do a good job in normal circumstances to make sure the kids are vaccinated, that there's not, anti-vaccination, going on at these schools, right? So that's something the school steps in. What will the school do now? Make sure all the kids have been tested, make sure all the families have been tested, make sure they know all the plasma, like, and everybody who's had it. Like, I'm just starting to ask these questions.
I'll tell you, my cousin in Singapore, they are tracking everybody through mobile apps, and her daughter's teacher tested positive, and they got notifications right away in the app that they had to self-quarantine themselves. And the next day, somebody came over to their house to let them know what that actually means, which means they can't even see anybody else within the families. They both, mother and daughter, had to quarantine themselves and could not see. I mean, fortunately, her father wasn't in the home when all this happened, so he was okay. But they had to self-quarantine. And if you move, and the app would you have to check in with the app and ping you at an odd time, and but they're at this point that they can do stuff like that. And we are nowhere close to that.
Yeah, I think privacy is a huge deal, right? The reason China was able to shut down is what they say goes, right? For better or for worse. And that doesn't necessarily work here in this circumstance, right? You're seeing
protests for people not wanting to stay home.
I've seen people protest yesterday, and I was like, I don't think you get it. Like, this started reminding me of the anti-vaccine stuff. I'm like, maybe you don't understand the science, right? Like, the science is pretty basic.
Us humans are our own worst enemy. I mean, that's proven over and over again.
Anyways, not to judge on that stuff, but it was just like, so ask yourself what it's going to take for you to send for you to bring your employees back to work, right? What's that going to be? What's the risk you're willing to put those people through? And think about it. We're in an industry where we have the ultimate luxury of being able to work from home. What about people who make things, physical things, right? Like, they have to be there. They have to physically get out there and do those things. So, what's it going to take for you to get on a flight? Like, just start asking those questions. And it's not going to be a switch tomorrow where it's going to be like, you know what? We overblew the whole thing. You're fine. Everybody's good.
Right.
If you have an issue, go take some malaria pills, right? Like, it's not going to be that, right? And if it is,
I'll tell you,
great.
we've made a conscious effort to say we're not going back into the office until we see everybody else go back, and we give ourselves 2 or 3 weeks of buffer. So
sure,
we're just going to err on the side of extra caution. Let's let everybody start going back in until we feel comfortable that it's safe to do so. Our employees come first, so stay home.
Stay home, and then with the kids thing, it's like, well, you can't be going to work and have the kids be home. So the kids have to be able to go to school, or some kind. If it's a summer, there needs to be camps that are open. And it's like, I don't know what makes me feel comfortable to do that. I'm still running through that framework. Is it everybody needs to be tested? Everybody who has had it is identified, and everybody who attends uses a contact tracing application. Maybe that's
maybe.
We're far from there. I can tell you that.
We're far from there right
now. There's no tests like the
Ottawa just past midnight on April 20th for our viewers. So
right. So
we'll see how this ages. We'll see how this ages.
Take a look at the testing kits from Spartan Biosense from Ottawa, right? Like, is everybody going to get one of those? Is every office going to get one of those? Like, are we going to get the 30-minute turnarounds? Like, okay. All I know is that we've all been home. We're all home. So if we had it, it's passed, hopefully. And if we don't have it, we haven't got it because we're home, right? Like, these are just the elements of it all.
That's how do you think the economy is going to rebound from this? I mean, they talk about, we could go into stock market terms, and you and I talk stocks all day, all night, but V-shape, U-shape.
So let's put this in context, right? So today, as of today, the stock market seems to think the money cannon stimulus, the impacts of that stimulus are greater than the economic
1 in 7
downfall of
people
the
with no
pandemic,
jobs. Yeah.
right? So that's what the stock market's saying.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's, you know, if you go to the folks who've really been impacted the most, the government's identified them and saying we're going to go work with these companies,
Mm-hmm.
airlines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then there's ones that are really benefiting from this, right? Like, and they're really moving the market. So like, I don't think the
Yeah, if you look at the
tech,
weighted average of the market, it was pushed by Apple, Amazon, Microsoft.
yeah, look, Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft are, I don't know, 14% as of today of the S&P. Like they're massive percentages of the market because they're so big.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you see that reflected in it. But if you go look at the last decade, most of corporate America has gone and taken on a bunch of debts, done a bunch of buybacks, all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they're left saying, being out of business for 100 days sinks us. We can't sustain it. And so
Yeah.
you're going to see an impact of folks that were too big for the payroll protection program and were too small to get the direct government stuff and are stuck in this, how quickly can you get applications, how big a check size can you get from these are all administration things, and we know our administration is not necessarily the best for doing this, right? Like, as an example, in the U.S., they're struggling with how to get checks to people for the $1,200 or and the stuff. And I'm like,
well, that's because they got to print Trump's name on it.
they gotta put
print Trump's name on it.
Politics aside, but like, you use a payroll provider for your employees, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Most companies here use a private payroll provider for employees. That information is private, and then once a year you report it to the government, and the
Mm-hmm.
government does pluses and minuses and writes a check, or you write a check.
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't these private payroll companies work directly with the government to say, each payroll, here's how much, here's how much is going, here's how much is coming, so that at the end of the year, it's the last pay period's plus or minuses that determine what it is, and the government either writes you a check or you write a check back, right? It just makes no sense to me that's so complicated and so convoluted. Like,
mm-hmm.
the CRA must be going through massive growth of hiring of people. That makes no sense.
Well, to CRA's credit, they have gotten money, EI money out to people pretty quick.
Look, I think they do a great job.
You go on an online form. It wasn't, as Trump was saying, built like a website of the past. It was pretty easy to use, from what my understanding, for most people, and they got money within a couple of days. That kudos to the Canadian government to do that.
That's great, right? But like, if you ask me how I would handle this economically, I would have said, okay, we're going to be out of business. The country is going to be out of business. The world's basically out of business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say each pay period, you should be getting that money back, or you should be getting that payroll.
Yep.
Right? So I would go look at your W-2, your T4, and go, okay, well, if I kind of analyze, if I kind of break it up by week, every week you should be entitled to this much money. And if the government was the payroll processor, they'd be able to ship money back and forth, right? Like, there's no payment rails out, right? There's only payment rails into the government. So these are just some of the things that are fundamentally going to have to change, because society's going to demand it after this. They're going to be like, this, there's no way this can't work.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think there's another problem also for the wage subsidy program here in Canada, where we, it's been told that we're going to get it, but if you don't have cash on your balance sheet to actually cover it until you do get it, and we don't know when it's coming, so it poses a whole other problem. So, I know this came overnight for them, and so they got to figure this stuff out in real time. But the longer the time goes, the more and more damage is happening to the economy.
Yeah. Well, costs are real, right? Like, fixed costs are real. You're going to go not pay your mortgage. Okay. You're going to not pay your credit card. Okay. You're going to not pay your rent. Okay. It's like, you're not going to pay your car payment.
Payroll, whatever,
You're not going to, like, you still have to pay payroll.
You gotta pay payroll. You still got to pay your software subscriptions to that help run your business or whatever it may be.
Right. Your business still moves forward. So these are just unprecedented times around this stuff, right? And what I can tell people is do what you can to survive, right? Because the only way your business shuts down is if you run out of money or you give up, right? And you can mentally stick with one, and the other you gotta have that resilience to get through it. There's no silver bullets here, right?
So you're talking.
Putting your hand out, waiting for a grant is good in some cases, but it's not going to get you past a lot of the stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're talking to founders and CEOs all the time. The advice you're giving them is obviously extend your runway, figure it out. What are some of the biggest challenges you're hearing from them right now? Like, are they, is it that they don't have the willingness to cut deep yet, or still haven't figured out that some of the fringe stuff that they're spending money on is not necessary? Like, what is it? What
Yeah, generally people have a good handle on what they're spending money on. They're really questioning the value of some stuff, which is a really good exercise. I think the biggest struggle for people is though we work mostly in technology, you're not used to running the business from your kitchen with everybody else at their kitchen.
Yeah.
Just that was never the expectation for any of this stuff, right? So you're like, so do you lose some of the productivity element? Like, I think people are really struggling with that. I've been involved in business bi-coastal for over a decade, so I think we have a very good understanding of how to do that, but it's not perfect, right? So we really are seeing people rise to the occasion on that and go, hey, I'm really struggling, I have a challenge, but like, how do you replicate the stand up? How do you replicate the to turn your seat around and ask somebody a question stuff, right? Like, these are all just things that are having to be readjusted.
Yeah, we just published a blog on how we've been doing it. I think, I've been in a culture where you're always in an office. I always think we perform best when we're sitting around people close to each other. You and I go into an empty office, chances are we're going to end up sitting right beside each other. It's just the way we've worked for a very long time. And I was very surprised at us being able to leverage tools to bring our cadences online, how we're doing it, put a blog out on it, just some simple things as like our teams are using Discord, which I understand was a gaming app to set up rooms and play gaming. And now we got Discord channels set up just for voice. We're jumping in from room to room as if you're walking from one section of the office to the other, which is pretty cool. It's, every day you got to iterate to try to replicate that in-person experience.
You bring up an interesting point. Hollywood movies, game studios have always kind of been on the cutting edge of how people should do things. In-game communication, network stability, movies to kind of give you the how something could present itself in the future, right? Like,
sure.
These are from one of the Iron Man movies, right? Like, it's like, it's just interesting to see how those industries really drive this. So I'm not surprised that Discord and other types of platforms are coming from game companies. Like Slack's came from a gaming platform and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So it's interesting. I
will say though, I've been pleasantly surprised at how often, for the first 2 weeks, never even received a Microsoft Teams invite or anything like that. But the past 2 weeks, I think I've been on some sort of Microsoft product, even though we don't use any Microsoft at TribalScale. Probably about 4 or 5 times in the past 2 weeks. I'm just of
I got to tell you,
Microsoft social programs. The stock price, I think, should just keep going up, but they've done a great job.
I got to tell you, Microsoft has I'm trying to be careful with my words. They're probably the best sales team in the world. That's kind of my take on it. Their products are amazing. Are they always the best in class? Maybe not. But they're for sure used because they're just ubiquitous and they're always getting people to adopt their products. And then, just it's really impressive. I think people underestimated them in the last decade, and bam, look at them. They're the most valuable company in the world, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, or not in the world, but at least in North America, at least, right? So this is it's really impressive, man. I gotta tell you, this is like Microsoft will be better off a year from today than they are now.
Yeah, I agree.
Right?
I absolutely agree.
They're not going to be worse because of this. They're not having to service their debt load because they finance stuff for people, right? Like, it doesn't work that way.
My mom called me to ask some questions about her using Microsoft Teams, for example. And that was 2 weeks ago. And now she's ready to start sending me invites on Microsoft Teams to like book time with me using her Microsoft. And that was something that she was, she's an older lady who's not that well versed in technology, but hey, she could figure it out. Anyway.
I got to tell you, for the elder generation, my parents' generation and stuff, they've really adopted this technology. They're at home, they're social. They call us every day. My mom was on Zoom with her seniors group. They were playing bridge online with their seniors group, much like a lot of folks are playing poker. Like, it's just really interesting to see them adapt and go, hey, this is the new world for me right now, and they're on it. Like, my mom's on Zoom and she's like, hey, sometimes I need a password, sometimes I don't. Like, we were walking through that. I was like, here's what happens if you don't. Or, she's like, okay. And she teaches young kids at Hindi school, and she's like, should I do it for them? I'm like, well, do you want to? She goes, I'd like to do something. I go, we put something together, right? Like, like, it's really fascinating.
It's cool. I mean, I love talking to other people, just seeing what they're using, what tech stacks they're using, how they've been able to replicate some of their day-to-day processes in this digital world. And it's working out really well. So, Amar, before we wrap up, I think it's like a big badge of honor. You're wearing the shirt right now, but to say you worked at XtremeLabs, there's amazing, super smart, sharp people all over the world now. Who came out of this organization that you helped create. Everybody talks about the PayPal mafia, and I like to say, hey, we're the XL mafia. So let's talk a little bit about what people from Extreme have gone on to do, and like how that makes you feel. Hey, first of all, how does that make you feel? It must feel great to see all these awesome, smart people who you saw as like babies, grow up and really start to own their craft and move on into real careers, right?
Look, it's we've been blessed with the success we've had, and watching people move on and do other things that are successful is great. Look, I'm wearing the shirt. I was wearing it today anyways. Anand's always like, what free t-shirt are you wearing? Right. And I'm like, I'm always wearing a t-shirt that I
like it though. You got the XtremeLabs shirt, the AU hat.
Yeah, the autonomic hat. Like, these were free, but they obviously cost a lot in terms of time, effort, money, and all those things. But it was just like, I always think you need to be proud of what you're doing. And for me, that a lot of that is exhibiting it through, wearing it sometimes. Right. And I think that's just something that, I like to do. And we had some great shirts, back in the day.
I still wear mine too.
I'd love to put up a mural one day of all the shirts, but it's another project for another day.
The other day, Michelle and I were decluttering our garage, and my XtremeLabs backpack came out, and she was like, "Do we still need this?" I was like, "Absolutely, I still need that. That ain't going anywhere." It's a badge of honor. It's a badge of honor.
I found my kids playing with a pen today, and it was the XtremeLabs flashlight pen, and I'm like, okay, cool, right? Yeah. Anyways, look, I think it's been awesome to see, just everybody who's stayed within the system. Like, at Autonomic, we had about 70 people around the time of the acquisition with Ford, and we'd worked at 3 companies with everyone. Right, like that was
a lot of people went, hey, XtremeLabs, Pivotal, Autonomic.
It was just phenomenal to see, right? Like, three companies, boom, boom, boom. Everybody had worked together, which says a lot for that. So it's exciting. Look, it's like you do get a bit proud and excited to buy it. You know, at the same time, I'm like, I look for an opportunity at some point to work again with people that we've worked with in the past. So like, you know, you've gone off, created Tribal. It's been great to watch that. Mike Stern's gone off to create Connected, which is great to watch that. Jeremy went on to do Every
Every
Jeremy Black. Yeah, that was acquired.
which yeah, he got acquired and then had a liquidation moment too, because he got acquired by Wave, and then Wave got acquired by
Yeah.
our
Okay.
block, and
Let's spend a couple seconds here on Wave accounting. Uh, if it wasn't the deal of the year last year in 2019, it should have been. A, because the number was $500 million plus. But B, the story behind that company, it took a decade to do. They went through ups, downs, near death experiences, near euphoric highs, had to shift business models or product models a few times. You really had to be passionate about it, and I think people underestimate the requirement for passion to doing these things because it was accounting.
yeah, it's
So
not like
you
it
have
hasn't
to
been done there.
like,
There's not like there's not so many other companies doing it, or yeah,
and to Kirk and the team's credit, like I just love this story because their desire and passion to see the end outcome never wavered. And this is what people don't remember, right? Like it's easy to talk about cool stuff when times are good, but talk about stuff that you're not passionate when times are bad. That's when you're going to see companies fall off.
of
Kirk
course.
never wavered. He never wavered and was resilient to see it. So I have a lot of time, respect, love for that entire team. And I knew a bunch of folks there, and Jeremy ended up being part of that team too. And it's just like amazing.
Still there. Jeremy's still there.
Yeah. And Kirk and I always have this good joke. He offered me a chance to invest, and I said no, because we were working with QuickBooks at the time, and I'm like, QuickBooks gonna eat your lunch, dude. I was wrong. I'm not too proud to admit I was wrong. Then Farhan went off and did Helpful, which was then acquired by Shopify, which is exciting to see. I really look forward to working with people again, whether it's we're working on the same team, whether we're working at partner companies, whether we can help recruit, whether we can give peer guidance on things, support. Like these are just all the things that I really get excited by doing when somebody reaches out to me, and it's like, oh man, instant response, instant, like, let's find a time,
Yeah.
let's have the conversation, let's not it be a one-off, let's go deep, let's get you to where you need and see if I can be helpful. Like I always want to do that.
Well, there's a list. I
Exciting.
mean, beyond just the entrepreneurial people who've taken a step. I mean, you got to be super proud to see XtremeLabs alumni, at RBC, CIBC, NFL, Bloomberg, New York Times. I mean, the list goes on and on. We've gone everywhere, and in important roles, right? In very important roles.
Yeah. Well, look, even the team that's still stuck through Pivotal now, VMware, they're running a pretty significant product in the VMware portfolio. Like these are, yeah, it's great, it's awesome. Don't take my muted responses. I'm not loving it, and it's awesome. I do go creep on LinkedIn and take a look at what people are doing because it's exciting, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I do get a kick out of it. So, and we're
Well,
all relatively young. We're not going anywhere, right? So it's like, hey, look, like if we can do stuff again, we should, and if we can, help each other out, we should, right?
well, I
And
got an
that's just been
idea.
great.
I got an idea. We had some pretty epic parties at XtremeLabs. As soon as this COVID stuff goes away, you throw us a party. We all show up.
Happy to.
I think I had to get you on camera, making sure you make that promise. So don't worry, extremers who are watching, I'll make it happen. Look, Amar, we've been on for quite a bit. I can't thank you enough for your time. I know how busy you are with family, work. Every other entrepreneur who's always trying to fight to get time on your calendar, I'm super appreciative for you to do this. Any last words? What do you want to say?
I think in this epically tough time, people really keep your head high, keep your attitude going, no matter how tough it is. How you get through this part will really dictate how you react and how you act on the other side. And reach out, find support. If you know, we all need it. It's bullshit for somebody to say they don't need it. So
Right.
be there for each other, and you know how we get through this will be really critical.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, man. And one last promise I got to get out of you. You got to come back and do this again.
Done deal.
Awesome. All right. Thanks for tuning in to First Name Basis podcast. This podcast, just so you know as well, is on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, our TribalScale blog, our website. I'm sure there's more reach than that. I can't remember everywhere it goes, but thanks everyone for tuning in. And Amar, thank you so much again for spending time with us.
Thank you.